Hello my lovely viewers and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to be part of the conversation by sharing your thoughts at the end of the video. Now, I welcome you to an eye-opening video. Today, we're exposing the shocking truth about the West's fear of Africa's awakening. Now, for too long, the West has exploited Africa's resources and manipulated its people. But now Africa is rising up and taking control of its own destiny. The West is shaken and their leaders are speaking out in desperation. From the former chief of staff of the French armies to the ranting Pam Kalaman and the warning from the EU's military staff director general, it's clear that the West is trying to maintain its grip on Africa. But we're not having it. We're calling out their attempts to recolonize and exploit our continent. Now, in this video, we'll be analyzing the shocking statements from these Western leaders and exploring what they really mean. We'll be discussing the implications of their words and the impact on Africa's future. And most importantly, we'll be celebrating Africa's rise to power and the dawn of a new era. But before we get into the videos, a big shout out to Uplifting Africa for this video. So with that said, come with me as we check out these videos out. And when I come back, I share my 2 cents on this.
I am convinced that in a few years, I don't know if it's 10 years or less or more, we will have the obligation to return and help these African countries. It is not China, Russia and Wagner who will bring sustainable solutions to the very great difficulties that these African countries and their populations face. In a recent announcement, the former Chief of Staff of the French armies, General François-Gérard Marie Lecointre, has stated that France and Europe are planning a military recolonization of Africa over the next decade. This controversial statement has sparked outrage and debate among Pan-Africanists. The idea of recolonizing Africa may seem absurd and outdated in the 21st century, but General Lecointre believes that it is necessary for France and Europe to regain their influence and power in the African continent. He argues that Africa is a crucial source of resources and energy for Europe, and that it is essential to secure these resources through military intervention and control. A continent that is going to experience a demographic explosion like no other continent has ever experienced. And so, imagine that this happens in the next 10-20 years and that it will have no consequences on Europe. The general's statement has been met with criticism from many Africans who see it as a blatant attempt to exploit and dominate our countries once again. Africa is not a playground for European powers. Furthermore, the idea of recolonization goes against the principles of democracy and self-determination, which are the cornerstones of modern international relations. Why not face this reality and stand by the rules and laws that they are creating? It is important for African nations to have autonomy over their own affairs, rather than being subject to the whims of foreign powers. This happened in the past and it shouldn't happen again. At least, not now that our eyes are wide open. While some may argue that it is necessary for securing resources and maintaining influence, the majority see it as a violation of African sovereignty and an attempt to re-establish colonial domination. Ultimately, it is up to us and the non-puppet leaders to decide our own fate and determine the best path forward for our people. Subscribe, drop a like, and share this video with others for this awareness to spread. Support the channel by tipping a super thanks of any amount of your choice. It will go a long way to assist and motivate us. The fight is just starting. Africa must be free. What is our common destiny as Europeans is the Mediterranean and Africa, where our destiny is at stake. And so we have constantly tried, we French, to train Europeans in this awareness of the need to act collectively in Africa and the Mediterranean. And I am absolutely sorry to see the failure of our commitments in the Sahel, and I think that in any case we will have to ask ourselves the question, because we cannot imagine having on our doorstep an entire continent that is sinking into the destruction of government and state apparatus, sinking into a form of civil war in many countries and more countries, in difficulties that are linked to climate change, which are even more dramatic on vulnerable populations, such as African populations. In addition, a continent that is going to experience a demographic explosion like no other continent has ever experienced. And so, imagine that this happens in the next 10-20 years and that it will have no consequences on Europe because we live in a kind of protected bubble, I don't know what, it's just unconscious. And so, I think that this common interest should one day make Europe decide to act as a political entity that will defend its own interests, including by means of the commitment of its armies.
You know what a real U.S. president would do? Say that C-130s are on their way to Niger today with the water and the medicine and the food our troops need, that they will have a full fighter pilot escort there. And if the Nigerian government or any other third world thug tries to even turn on their air defense systems, we should show those leaders and those thugs what the target package looks like on their houses and their family members, because it should not be Americans that are suffering because President Biden and Blinken are so embarrassed that their strategy in Africa failed that they're willing to let Americans' conditions deteriorate. They're willing to let our military spouses and family members wonder what's going to happen to their loved ones with their blood pressure rising and no blood pressure medication, or concerned what will happen now that we're in May and there's not sufficient malaria medication. We should always keep our people's well-being at the forefront of our minds. And today we should be resupplying our troops in Niger, Africa, and we should dare these thugs and criminals to mess with us while we're doing that. This is a total embarrassment, but saving politicians and people like Biden and Blinken from embarrassment is not worth putting U.S. troops at risk.
Western countries are being pushed out of West and Central Africa as other world players gain influence there. That's the message from the EU's Military Staff Director General, who's raised concerns over Europe potentially losing access to the continent's resources.
We are more or less pushed out, many Western countries, including US, from Niger, from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from other countries. And this will cause problems for the future if we don't act. So we are thinking about an integrated approach to step up our efforts in Africa. And especially this approach will be that we will support them in a way that they ask for, instead of bringing them good like we did in the past.
But the truth is, it's a million miles from the reality of EU-Africa trade policy as it exists now, because our economic relations with Africa are simply a continuation of European colonialism, perpetuating exploitation by other means. Africa trades more with Europe than it does with itself. It's portrayed as a poor continent, but actually it's the richest. It's just that the people there are denied the fruits of their land and their labour by unequal economic relations, by unfair trade rules, by illicit capital flights into the Western banks, and by multinational corporations allowed off the leash by Washington, London and Brussels. I don't think you'd have to be a genius to know that the last thing the Horn of Africa needs is more foreign military bases, more weapons and more European meddling. What we call our strategic relationship isn't about human flourishing, it's about the EU's ambitions as a superpower. There's now a new great game in the Horn of Africa. Greater and lesser powers are pockmarking the place with military bases. France, the US, China, Germany, Japan, Italy, Saudi Arabia, all have a presence in the tiny area of Djibouti alone. Mercenaries are swarming in from all quarters. The entire region is being militarized. War is in the air. And what about the people facing climate and food insecurity? None of this benefits them. We talk about instability, but we only make it worse. We flood the place with weapons, hand over the profits to European arms companies, and charge the bill to our citizens. And then with the carnage, we go back in and we do it all again. It's a racket. Strategic relationship, it's one thing after another, isn't it? Really, it's the same as it ever was. And all I can say is, God save Africa from Europeans offering help.
Now, as an African, it is heartbreaking and infuriating to witness the blatant disregard for our sovereignty and dignity by Western leaders. The notion that Africa is a playground for European powers to exploit and dominate is a relic of the past that we will no longer tolerate. The comments made by the former chief of staff of the French armies and the Pamkalamar are a stark reminder of the paternalistic and condescending attitude that the West has towards Africa. They speak of helping and assisting Africa as if Africa is incapable of governing itself or making its own decisions. But Africans are not fools. We know that their true intentions are to maintain their grip on our resources and exploit our people for their own gain. Africa will not be fooled by their empty promises or intimidated by their threats. As Africans, we are rising up and taking control of our own destiny. We are asserting our sovereignty and demanding respect from the global community. We will no longer be treated as pawns in the game of global politics or as a source of cheap labor and resources. We are a continent of proud people with a rich history and culture. We are capable of governing ourselves and making our own decisions. Africa does not need the West to save Africa or help Africa. Africa needs them to respect their sovereignty and treat Africa as equals. The era of colonialism and exploitation is over. It is time for a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. Africa will no longer be held hostage by the West's fear of losing their grip on our resources. We will forge our own path and determine our own future. Now, as the EU's military staff director general warned, the West is being pushed out of West and Central Africa as other world players gain influence. Now, this is a testament to Africa's growing strength and assertiveness as a continent. Africa will no longer be dictated to or intimidated by the West. Africa is Africa and it is rising. Africa will not be silenced or oppressed. It will not be treated as anything less than equals. The time has come. We will seize it with both hands. Now, these recent remarks from Western leaders reveal a startling truth that the West cannot afford to lose Africa. The mere fact that countries like Niger, Mali, and others are asserting their independence and seeking alternative partnerships has sent shock waves throughout the Western world. Now, this panic is a clear indication that Africa is a vital component of the West's geopolitical strategy, and they cannot simply do away with Africa. The West's scramble to maintain their grip on the continent is a testament to Africa's rising power and influence. As we continue to break free from the shackles of colonialism and neocolonialism, the West is growing increasingly desperate to hold on to their interests here. But Africa will not be swayed. We will not be intimidated. We should continue to forge our own path, and we should not be dictated to by those who seek to exploit us. The era of African sovereignty has dawned, and the West must learn to adapt to this new era. Now, a growing number of African nations are pushing the US and France out of the continent while welcoming China and Russia. The use of coercion and military power that characterizes Western imperialist doctrine is being replaced by a new model of cooperation that seeks mutual benefit rather than hegemony of one party. Now, the struggle of the African people across the continent, particularly in the Sahel, is not an isolated event. All over the African continent, they are rising. The whole continent is burning right now. So we have not seen the last of the African popular masses overthrowing governments. We've only seen the beginning. They're kicking France out, and the United States will be next, declared journalist and activist Eugene Perrier on 19 September 2023 during protests against US and French imperialism and warmongering in the Sahel on the UN General Assembly opening day in New York. Now, in West African countries such as Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad, protests against French colonialism and coups d'etat against Western vassal governments are spreading, with new administrations emerging that heralded a new path to self-determination and sovereignty. Former permanent representative of the African Union to the United States claimed that the recent military coups in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea were part of the first phases of an African revolution against West neocolonialism. Now, she added that this wave of military interventions is a reaction of the West's ongoing plunder of the continent's natural resources. Now, my last question before we come to the end of the video is, why should the West call Africans thugs now, just because they've decided that they no longer want to deal with the West? Share your thoughts, your contributions as well in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video as I bring you another interesting video.